I'm Christine, and I'm a product manager at Beeline. I want to talk to you today about this thing we call the flexible workforce. You could spend a lot of time researching and reading various articles and white papers on the subject, or you could spend a little time with me. Come on, it seems like an easy choice, so let's get started. In this video, I'm going to cover just who is included in the flexible workforce, what drives a company to need or want flexible workers, and what it means for a company to manage these workers. For more and more companies today, their total workforce is made up of a variety of workers, including those known as flexible workers. As the flexible workforce grows and evolves, many of us have a business need to better understand it. What better way to understand than to get up close and personal with a company using a flexible workforce? Meet Hammond Miller and Company Incorporated, or HMC for short. HMC is a fictional multinational financial company headquartered in the United States. They have a total of around 58,000 employees worldwide and approximately 18,000 flexible workers engaged at any one time. Wow, that seems like a lot. That means that currently about 24% of HMC's total workforce are flexible workers. According to a 2012 Aberdeen report, 26%, or nearly 1 out of every 4 workers in the average organization, are part of the flexible workforce, so HMC seems to be in line with current trends. When asked, HMC stated that they generally view using a flexible workforce as a more efficient way to augment their teams as business needs dictate. More specific reasons cited for using a flexible workforce include when a specialized skill set is needed for a project, at times when talent is needed quickly, as coverage during seasonal peaks, and as coverage for employees on leave. This growing use of a flexible workforce has roots in a variety of factors, including economic uncertainty, skill shortages, and many individuals choosing to enter the workforce through alternative methods. So now we know that our flexible workers are a growing part of the total workforce, and we also know a little about why they are important for a company like HMC. I think we need to next look at who these flexible workers are. The flexible workforce is commonly segmented into 3 main classifications: independent contractors, contingent staffing, and outsourcing. These classifications are important because they carry with them a number of differences that impact how workers are acquired, how they are managed, and how they are priced, but we are getting a little ahead of ourselves. For now, we want to first focus on how the workers in each classification are engaged. When HMC uses independent contractors, they engage directly with the independent contractor. Okay, sometimes they use what's called a pass-through vendor for independent contractors, but with a pass-through vendor come a whole set of nuances and considerations that are the materials for another video entirely. So for the sake of argument in this video, we will be taking a more general approach to independent contractors. Agreed? Good. Now, where were we? Yes, independent contractors are engaged directly. For contingent staffing needs, they engage with a person also referred to as a contractor through a supplier. Those suppliers are typically staffing companies. And for outsourcing initiatives, HMC engages with an outsourcing firm, and depending on what is required, the firm will select the workers necessary to complete the job. Another key difference we can see for these 3 classifications has to do with responsibility, meaning who does HMC hold responsible for the work that needs to be done? Remember, when HMC engages with an independent contractor, they do it directly. That means that the independent contractor, or IC, acts as their own supplier. They personally accept all responsibility and guarantee their own work. When HMC engages with a contingent staffing contractor, even though they were engaged through a staffing company, the staffing company does not guarantee the work of the contractor. And when HMC engages with a firm for outsourcing, the firm not only assumes all responsibility and guarantees their work, they may even supply a warranty to HMC. Typically, an outsourcing firm is selected based on their particular specialization, industry, or geographical location. So, our flexible workforce has now been divided into 3 classifications. Let's see if we can go a little deeper to better understand these flexible workers. Let's take a look at contingent staffing first. Contingent staffing is referred to by many as classic temporary labor or even staff augmentation. Within the world of contingent staffing, we see two distinct types of workers being used: professional contractors, think IT, finance, or legal professionals, and temporary labor. These are your seasonal workers or those working temporary positions in light industrial, admin, or clerical fields. To paint an even clearer picture, let's look at some of the recent contingent staffing needs that HMC has had. HMC issues credit cards for one of the big home improvement stores and recently needed to bring in some seasonal credit call center representatives to take calls from customers requesting new financing or with financing questions. This seasonal addition to their staff was to support the peak season for home improvements. So let's look at the facts. These flexible workers were needed on a temporary basis, and to perform a commoditized skill, they were to be compensated hourly and under the direction of an HMC manager. That combination of characteristics describes a temporary laborer, one type of contingent staffing flexible worker. HMC wanted to add 30 of these temporary workers for 5 months, so their procurement department worked with a preferred supplier, Athena Staffing, to bring in the needed help. Meanwhile, in another part of the company, one of the managers for HMC's digital media team needed a Flash developer for a 6-month project. The manager reached out to an old college friend that worked at a local staffing agency to see if he knew of any good Flash developers looking for work. The friend gave a glowing recommendation to a Flash developer named Carlos, and within the week, Carlos was a contractor for HMC. So what do the facts tell us about this flexible worker? Well, Carlos is definitely a professional in his field and will be augmenting the digital media team at HMC. This makes him what we like to call a professional contractor. This is the other type of contingent staffing flexible worker. As a contractor, he will be compensated at an hourly rate and will be taking direction from the manager at HMC. So now that we have met some contingent staffing workers and understand some of the needs they fill for HMC, let's meet some of the workers HMC utilizes for its outsourcing needs. Now, before we get to our friends in outsourcing, it is important to state that outsourcing is the biggest piece of the pie for a reason. Multiple arrangements fit in the broad heading of outsourcing. We can divide it along the lines of strategic and non-strategic, where strategic represents outsourcing initiatives that produce a result a company needs and drive revenue growth for the company. Things like IT projects or other consulting services, or even professional services like offshoring or business process outsourcing. On the non-strategic side, companies contract with firms to handle functions that are not core to their business, like janitorial services, landscaping, security, and even snow plowing. Like we did for contingent staffing, let's take a closer look at some recent outsourcing done by HMC. The upper management at HMC has recently made the decision to move their support call center offshore. They selected Apollo Solutions to be their outsourcing service provider. Apollo Solutions has a global call center in the Philippines that will handle all of the Tier 1 and Tier 2 support calls for HMC. Apollo Solutions, in collaboration with HMC, created a Statement of Work, or SOW, that listed all the terms and conditions, as well as defined the timeline and work activities to be completed. Apollo and HMC have agreed to a multi-year contract, where HMC is estimated to spend a little over $1 million. To meet the demands of the HMC customers calling for support, Apollo initially hired and trained 100 call center representatives. An outsourcing characteristic worth pointing out here is that HMC does not manage nor dictate the number of call center representatives handling their support calls. Remember, the work to be done was defined in the SOW, and it is up to Apollo to make sure it happens. Let's look at another decision made by the upper management of HMC. This strategic outsourcing story is about HMC and their old ERP technology. After careful consideration, HMC had to face the fact that their ERP technology had become outdated. Due to this aging issue, most new integrations had become so difficult that HMC was spending money on additional IT personnel to work strictly on integrations. Also, some of the business processes driven by the older ERP system were seen as inefficient and somewhat constrictive. So HMC decided it was time to make a change, and to assist them, selected a consulting firm offering independent ERP selection services. The consulting firm, Hera Consulting, promised to deliver a set of results from identifying and interviewing vendors to vendor price and contract negotiations. And it is by their success in delivering these results that they would be compensated. To complete the agreed-upon work, Hera sent over 2 consultants, Catherine and Charles, to work with HMC during this process. As consultants, Catherine and Charles provided HMC expertise and a proven methodology that was not inherent at HMC. And because Catherine and Charles are consultants, they take their direction from Hera Consulting and may be working on consulting assignments for other Hera clients at the same time they are working with HMC. So now I hope you are feeling pretty good about the strategic side of outsourcing and the flexible workers that make it possible. Now let's flip the coin and look at the non-strategic side of outsourcing. When it comes to non-strategic outsourcing, HMC has some contracts like the ones with the snow plowing companies that are seasonal, and some like the ones with the janitorial services firms that are ongoing. One thing to remember about all outsourcing is that HMC contracts for results. They don't tell the janitorial firm how to clean the bathroom, just that they expect it to be cleaned daily. About 8 months ago, HMC decided to open an on-site cafeteria in their London office. They decided that this new cafeteria would need to be staffed from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Now, HMC will happily remind you that they are in the business of all things financial, so that would make food service outside the scope of their core business and a ripe candidate for non-strategic outsourcing. HMC's procurement department sent the food service job out for bid, and ultimately contracted through a master service agreement with a UK firm that provides food service called Celine Group Services. Celine provides HMC with a full-service cafeteria run by 20 Celine employees. These Celine employees are considered flexible workers by HMC and are referred to as service workers. These service workers work in the HMC building, but they are hired by Celine, report their time to Celine, get paid by Celine, and take their direction from Celine. But in order for these 20 service workers to access the cafeteria each day, they must be provided with security badges by HMC. Due to the higher turnover in the food service industry and many other industries often associated with non-strategic outsourcing, managing the security process is somewhat cumbersome for HMC, as you can imagine. So I wasn't kidding when I said that outsourcing was the biggest piece of the pie, right? Now let's move from the biggest to the smallest. We have reached our last classification and our last flexible worker, the independent contractor. I saved them for last because while the smallest piece of the pie, they can be the hardest to nail down and often cause companies the most grief. Most of that grief comes from the potential for worker misclassification that is such a part of the independent contractor world. The fines and penalties that occur from misclassification are no laughing matter. In recent years, there have been more than one checklist created to aid companies in understanding the characteristics of an IC. If you don't believe me, just do an internet search. The reason it is so important to understand the true classification of the worker really centers around who should be paying employment taxes, the company for employees, or the worker as an independent contractor. A couple of items that help me keep it straight are that ICs usually have multiple clients, offer their services to the general public, and have control over when, where, and how they complete their work. Also, ICs generally provide their own tools, equipment, and resources when working. Okay, so now that we have a bit of a framework for understanding ICs, let's see how HMC engaged with a recent IC. So in our outsourcing story from a few minutes ago, HMC was selecting a new ERP system, right? Well, let's fast forward a bit and the ERP implementation has begun. Joy, oh joy! No, really, it is exciting, but it is a lot of work. One thing that is important to the success of the implementation is making sure that all the end users at HMC have training on the new system. There were a number of directions the training manager of HMC could have gone in orchestrating this training, but how could he resist when someone on his team mentioned that they knew someone who had done training for their brother-in-law's sister's friend's company, and they were an ERP training guru? I mean, come on, they said guru. Meet Iris. In addition to being an ERP training expert, okay, guru, Iris also passes the test for an independent contractor. A contract was created between Iris and HMC, including deliverables outlining the work that Iris would do to design and deliver ERP training for HMC. HMC left how the work was done up to Iris, and each time Iris completed a milestone, she was compensated. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? That sounds a lot like strategic outsourcing to me. Well, it is very similar, and often the work and contract could be the same. The difference is about who guarantees the work. In outsourcing, it is a firm. In an IC engagement, it is the individual independent contractor. I am happy to report Iris got everyone trained by the contracted deadline and is now working with a new company on another contract. Wow, those stories really show the variety of needs a single company can have for flexible workers. Even more telling is the variety of ways or paths the company took to acquire those workers. The reality is that a need will be met, even if it is not always the best way to do it. According to a recent statistic, only about 23% of organizations manage their entire flexible workforce with a single centralized program. Many are just like our friends at HMC, and it is a bit all over the place. This decentralized or many paths approach to managing a flexible workforce comes with inherent problems. Like visibility, to start. One of the top priorities listed by many companies with a flexible workforce is improving visibility into all components of their flexible workforce management. If you don't know who your flexible workforce is, where they are in your company, what jobs they are doing, and if you have the right number of them, it is hard to get to the real things that impress your bosses, like cost control, operational efficiency, compliance, and quality. Enter the Vendor Management System, or as it is better known, the VMS. Now here's an application that can provide a way for a company like HMC to get on one path when managing and procuring their flexible workforce. And did you know that 89% of best-in-class flexible workforce management programs use a VMS? Well, they do, and what they get from using a VMS, for one, is better visibility and tracking. And once you know the who, what, when, where, and why of your flexible workforce, other benefits are intrinsic, like controlling costs, improving efficiencies, better quality, and mitigating risks. Sounds good, right? Well, I think so. Wow, look at the time. You should feel good. We have covered a lot of ground in a relatively short amount of time. Well, before I go, I have to take an extra 30 seconds to tell you about the great place I work, Beeline. At Beeline, we have the intelligent workforce solutions, and of course that includes a VMS, to help a company like HMC, or even yours, better manage your flexible workforce. Want to know more about Beeline or flexible workforce management in general? Stop by our website at www.beeline.com. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.